The Belgian Malinois did not just bark, he screamed. It was a sound that tore through the freezing silence of the winter forest, a high-pitched shriek of absolute desperation that made the hair on the back of Elias's neck stand straight up. Barnaby was not attacking. He was digging. He was tearing at the frozen earth beneath the old oak tree with a manic intensity that defied all logic. His paws were already raw, red staining the pristine white snow, but he would not stop. Elias shouted the command to heel, but for the first time in 6 years of service, the dog ignored him. Barnaby bit into a thick frozen tree root and pulled, his muscles trembling, his eyes rolling back in frantic terror. He wasn't trying to bury a bone, he was trying to break in. And when Elias finally dropped to his knees to pull the dog back, he felt it too. A faint, rhythmic thumping coming from deep beneath the ground. Someone was down there, and they were running out of time. The winter in Silver Creek, Colorado was unforgiving. It was the kind of cold that settled into your bones and refused to leave, turning the breath in your lungs to ice before you could even exhale. For Elias Thorne, a retired Marine Scout sniper, the cold was a familiar enemy. It reminded him of long nights in the mountains of Afghanistan, waiting for a target that might never show. But he wasn't in the mountains anymore, and his only target these days was a warm fire and a pot of black coffee. He adjusted his scarf, the wool scratching against his bearded chin, and looked down at his partner. Barnaby walked with a military precision that retirement had not dulled. The Malinois was 7 years old, his muzzle dusted with gray, his left ear notched from a close call with a jagged fence during a pursuit 3 years ago. They moved together in silence, two veterans who had seen too much of the world's darkness and had come to the middle of nowhere to find a little bit of light. They were walking the perimeter of the property, a daily ritual that Elias kept more for his own peace of mind than for any real security threat. Silver Creek was a sleepy town. The biggest news in the last decade had been the high school football team making the state semifinals. Crime was non-existent, or at least, that is what everyone liked to believe. "Easy, boy," Elias murmured, his breath clouding in the air. "Let's head back. Storm's coming in." The sky above them was turning a bruised purple, heavy clouds rolling over the peaks like a slow-moving avalanche. The weather radio had warned of a blizzard, the worst in 20 years, expected to hit by nightfall. Elias wanted to be inside with the wood stove roaring before the first flakes fell. But Barnaby stopped. The dog froze mid-step, his front right paw raised, his head cocked to the side. His ears, usually swiveling like radar dishes, locked onto something in the distance. "What is it?" Elias asked, his hand instinctively drifting to the utility knife clipped to his belt. "Deer? Coyote?" Barnaby did not look at him. The dog's body was rigid, vibrating with a low-frequency tension that traveled up the leather leash and into Elias's hand. He wasn't looking at the woods. He was looking toward the old Miller farmhouse about a quarter of a mile down the road. The Miller place had been abandoned for 5 years, ever since Old Man Miller passed away. The windows were boarded up, the paint peeling, the barn slowly collapsing under the weight of heavy winters. A developer from Denver had bought it 6 months ago, put up a "no trespassing" sign, and then seemingly forgot about it. Barnaby let out a low whine, a sound that was entirely out of character for a dog who had once taken down 3 armed insurgents without making a noise. "Leave it," Elias commanded softly. "It's just an old house, Barnaby." Barnaby turned his head, looking at Elias with eyes that held a profound, intelligent urgency. He barked once, sharp, demanding. Then he turned back to the farmhouse and pulled hard on the lead. Elias frowned. He knew this dog better than he knew himself. If Barnaby said something was wrong, something was wrong. He sighed, adjusting his grip. "All right, we'll look, but make it quick." As they crossed the overgrown field separating the properties, the wind began to pick up, whistling through the dead stalks of corn. The farmhouse loomed ahead, a skeletal silhouette against the darkening sky. Barnaby's pace quickened, his nose working furiously, taking in scents that Elias couldn't hope to detect. They reached the edge of the yard. The snow here was undisturbed, a flat white sheet covering the driveway. No tire tracks, no footprints. The place looked dead. But Barnaby wasn't interested in the house. He dragged Elias toward the detached garage, a crumbling brick structure with rotting wooden doors that were padlocked shut. The dog stopped 10 feet from the garage doors. The hackles on his back rose into a stiff ridge. He lowered his head, a deep, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. It wasn't the growl of aggression, it was the growl of warning. "Is someone in there?" Elias whispered, unclipping the safety strap on his holster. He carried a legal concealed firearm, a habit he couldn't break. "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence answered him, just the wind rattling the loose tin on the roof. Barnaby lunged. He hit the end of the leash with enough force to nearly dislocate Elias's shoulder. He wasn't trying to get to the doors. He was trying to get to a pile of old, tarp-covered lumber stacked haphazardly against the side of the garage. "Barnaby, heel!" Elias shouted, planting his boots in the snow. The dog ignored him. He was thrashing, snapping at the air, his eyes wide and wild. He let out a piercing yelp, then another. It sounded like he was in pain, but Elias knew he wasn't injured. He was distressed. Trust the dog. That was the first rule of canine handling. You might have the map, but the dog has the compass. Elias loosened the leash and followed. Barnaby scrambled over a snowbank and began tearing at the blue tarp covering the wood. He bit the plastic, ripping it aside, exposing rotted 2x4s. He dug at the wood, his claws splintering the timber. Okay, move," Elias said, pushing the dog back gently. "Let me see." Elias grabbed the top beam and heaved it aside. Then the next. Beneath the wood wasn't just dirt. There was a metal grate, rusted and covered in chicken wire. It looked like an old drainage cover, something that hadn't been touched in decades. Barnaby pressed his nose against the grate and barked, a booming sound that echoed off the brick walls. Elias knelt, shining his flashlight down through the mesh. It was just a black hole, maybe 4 feet deep, leading to a concrete pipe. Then he heard it. It was faint, barely audible over the wind, but it was there. "Help!" It was a whisper, a child's whisper. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He dropped flat onto the snow, pressing his face close to the cold metal. "I can hear you! Who is down there?" "Please," the voice cracked. "It's dark." Elias scrambled up, adrenaline flooding his system. He grabbed the edge of the grate and pulled. It was rusted shut, welded by time and ice. "Barnaby, back!" He kicked the grate once, twice. The metal groaned but didn't budge. He needed a lever. He grabbed one of the discarded 2x4s and wedged it under the rim. "Hold on!" he shouted down. "I'm getting you out!" With a roar of effort, he threw his weight onto the lever. The rust shrieked, and the grate popped free, flipping over into the snow. Barnaby was there instantly, whining, trying to jump into the hole. Elias held him back by the collar. He shined the light down. At the bottom of the drainage shaft, huddled in a few inches of freezing muck, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was wearing a thin pink coat that was smeared with dirt, her face pale, her lips blue. "My God," Elias breathed. "Sweetheart, can you reach up?" She shook her head weakly. She was too small and the drop was too steep. "Stay there, I'm coming down." Elias didn't hesitate. He dropped his legs into the shaft, lowering himself until his boots hit the sludge. The space was tight, claustrophobic. He reached out and grabbed the girl. She was shaking so violently her teeth rattled. "I've got you," he whispered, wrapping his coat around her. "I've got you." He lifted her up toward the opening. "Barnaby, wait!" He hoisted the girl onto the snowy ledge above. She scrambled away from the hole, curling into a ball. Elias pulled himself up after her, gasping for air. Barnaby immediately began licking the girl's face, whining softly, his tail tucking between his legs in submission. He sensed her fragility. The girl buried her face in the dog's fur, sobbing. Elias scanned the area. How long had she been down there? The Miller place was miles from town. She hadn't just walked here and fallen in. The wood had been stacked over the grate. Someone had put her there. The realization hit Elias like a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. This was a grave. "What's your name?" Elias asked gently, scanning the tree line. "Lily," she stammered. "Okay, Lily, we need to go. Now!" He reached for her, but Barnaby suddenly spun around, facing the driveway. The dog's growl returned, deeper this time, vibrating through the ground. Headlights cut through the gloom. A black pickup truck was rolling slowly up the long driveway, the tires crunching on the snow. It stopped 20 yards away. The engine idled, a low, menacing hum. Elias stood up, placing himself between the truck and the girl. He put his hand on his holster. The truck door opened. A man stepped out. He was big, wearing a heavy Carhartt jacket and a hunter's cap. He held a flashlight in one hand and a shovel in the other. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Evening there," the man called out. His voice was casual, friendly. "Saw some lights. Everything okay?" Elias didn't smile back. "Just walking my dog. Found a hole. Hazardous." The man took a step closer. "Is that right? You know, this is private property. New owner doesn't like trespassers." "I'll be sure to tell the sheriff," Elias said, his voice flat. "Right after I get this little girl to the hospital." The man stopped. He looked at Lily, then back at Elias. The fake smile vanished. "Now, why would you want to go and involve the sheriff? It's just a misunderstanding." Barnaby was a statue. His muscles were coiled springs. He wasn't looking at the man's face. He was looking at the man's right hand, which was drifting toward the small of his back. "Take another step and my dog will tear your throat out," Elias said calmly. The man chuckled darkly. "That's a nice dog. Shame." The man moved fast. His hand whipped from behind his back, revealing a silver revolver. "Barnaby, hit!" Elias screamed. The command was executed before the sound had even left his lips. Barnaby launched himself across the snow, a blur of tan and black fur. The gun cracked, a deafening boom in the quiet air. Barnaby didn't stop. He hit the man in the chest like a cannonball, knocking him backward into the snow. The gun flew from the man's hand, sliding across the ice. The man screamed as Barnaby's jaws clamped onto his forearm. The pressure was immense, bone-crushing. The man flailed, punching the dog with his free hand, but Barnaby was a machine made of muscle and drive. He shook his head violently, dragging the man further away from the girl. Elias rushed forward, kicking the revolver out of reach. He drew his own weapon. "Call him off! Call him off!" the man shrieked. "Barnaby, out!" Elias shouted. The dog released the arm instantly, but stood over the man, his teeth bared, saliva dripping onto the man's jacket. He barked inches from the man's face, a sound of pure dominance. Elias kept his gun trained on the man. "Stay down, face in the snow!" He glanced back at Lily. She was staring wide-eyed but safe. "You okay, Barnaby?" Elias asked, his voice trembling slightly. The dog sneezed and shook his coat, then looked up at Elias. There was a graze on his shoulder, a strip of fur missing where the bullet had passed, barely scratching the skin. An inch to the right and he would have been dead. "Good boy," Elias breathed. "You're a damn good boy." Elias zip-tied the man's hands with the restraints he kept in his survival kit. He dragged him to the garage wall and made him sit. "Who are you?" Elias demanded. The man spat blood into the snow. "You have no idea what you just stepped into, old man. You think I'm alone?" Elias went cold. "What do you mean?" "The storm," the man grinned, his teeth stained red. "The delivery is tonight. They're coming for the rest of them." "The rest of them?" Elias grabbed the man by the collar. "Who else?" The man just laughed. Elias looked at Barnaby. The dog had left the man and was back at the grate. He was sniffing the air, pacing in circles, whining again. "No," Elias whispered. "Not more." He ran back to the open hole. "Lily, did you hear anyone else down there?" The girl nodded slowly, tears freezing on her cheeks. "The other doors. In the tunnel." It wasn't just a drainage pipe. It was a ventilation system for something bigger. "We have to go down," Elias said. He looked at the storm raging above. If he waited for the police, the roads might be impassable. If the man's partners were coming tonight, they would clear the evidence. And evidence meant children. "Barnaby, watch him," Elias pointed to the man. The dog sat, his gaze fixing on the prisoner with lethal intensity. The man shrank back against the bricks. He knew that if he moved, the dog would finish the job. Elias grabbed the shovel the man had dropped and lowered himself back into the hole. He crawled through the pipe, the smell of damp earth and rust filling his nose. After 10 feet, the pipe opened up into a larger concrete room. A cellar. It was cold, but dry. Along the wall were 3 heavy steel doors, like the kind used on old root cellars. He ran to the first one. Locked. He smashed the lock with the edge of the shovel. The metal clanged, sparks flying. He hit it again, and again. The hasp broke. He threw the door open. Empty. Just a mattress and a bucket. He moved to the second door. He shattered the lock. Inside, huddled together under a dirty wool blanket, were 2 more children, a boy and a girl, older than Lily, maybe 10 or 11. They screamed when they saw the shovel. "It's okay, I'm a friend." Elias dropped the shovel and held up his hands. "I'm getting you out." He ushered them into the main room. "Is there anyone else?" "Just us," the boy whispered. "He said he was going to sell us tonight." Elias felt a rage so hot it almost blinded him. He guided the children to the pipe. "Crawl up. My dog is up there. He won't hurt you. He's a hero." One by one, he helped them up the shaft. When Elias climbed out, the snow was falling heavily now, a white curtain that reduced visibility to a few yards. He gathered the 3 children near the garage wall, shielding them from the wind. Suddenly, Barnaby stood up. His ears swiveled toward the road. Lights. More lights. 2 large vans were coming up the driveway, struggling against the drifts. "They're here!" the prisoner laughed from the ground. "You're dead! You're all dead!" Elias looked at the children. He looked at the vast, open field behind the house. They couldn't outrun vans in deep snow. They were trapped. He checked his weapon. 6 rounds, 3 kids, 1 dog, and at least 4 or 5 men approaching. "Get in the garage," Elias ordered the kids. He kicked the side door open. "Lock it from the inside. Don't open it unless you hear my voice." The kids scrambled inside. Elias took cover behind the prisoner's truck. Barnaby crouched beside him, silent, ready. The vans stopped. Doors slid open. Men with tactical gear and rifles stepped out. These weren't sloppy criminals, these were professionals. "Give us the merchandise, Reynolds," one of them shouted over the wind. "We're behind schedule." "He's got a gun!" the prisoner Reynolds screamed. "Behind the truck!" Bullets immediately peppered the side of the pickup, shattering the glass. Elias ducked, covering Barnaby. This was a kill zone. He needed a distraction. "Barnaby," Elias whispered, grabbing the dog's head. He looked into those amber eyes. "Seek." He pointed not at the men, but toward the woods, flanking them. Barnaby understood. He didn't run straight at the guns. He stayed low, belly to the snow, and disappeared into the whiteout, circling wide. Elias popped up and fired 2 shots. One man went down, touching his leg. The others scattered, taking cover behind their vans. "Suppressing fire!" a voice commanded. Automatic gunfire tore through the quiet night. Elias was pinned. He couldn't move. He counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Screams erupted from the right flank. Barnaby had circled behind them. He hit the man on the far right, dragging him down into the darkness. The man's rifle fired wildly into the air. Panic ensued. The attackers couldn't see the dog in the blizzard. He was a ghost, a shadow that bit and vanished. "It's a wolf! It's a huge wolf!" one man yelled, firing blindly into the trees. Barnaby struck again, launching from the roof of the first van onto a man's back. The man crumpled. Elias saw his opening. He stepped out from behind the truck, taking careful aim. He shot the tire of the lead van, then the driver of the second van who was trying to flank him. "Pull back! Pull back!" the leader shouted. They were disoriented, attacked by a sniper to the front and a demon in the rear. They dragged their wounded into the second van. The engine roared. They spun the tires, throwing snow, and sped off in reverse, disappearing into the storm. They weren't willing to die for this shipment. Silence returned to the farm. "Barnaby!" Elias called out, his heart in his throat. "Here!" For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of the wind. Then a shape emerged from the swirling snow. Barnaby trotted back, his gait slightly uneven. He was limping on his left hind leg and his muzzle was stained red, but his tail gave a slow, rhythmic wag. He walked up to Elias and sat, leaning his heavy body against Elias's leg. Elias dropped his gun and hugged the dog, burying his face in the wet, snowy fur. "You crazy, beautiful idiot," he sobbed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Real sirens this time. Sheriff Miller, followed by state troopers. The prisoner Reynolds, still tied up, had nowhere to go. The investigation that followed shook the state of Colorado. The farmhouse was identified as a holding site for a multi-state trafficking ring. The man, Reynolds, gave up the names of the entire network in exchange for a plea deal that kept him off death row. The 3 children were reunited with families from 3 different states, missing person cases that had gone cold for months. 6 months later, spring had finally come to Silver Creek. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. A ceremony was held at the town hall. The governor was there. The families of the children were there. Elias stood on the stage, uncomfortable in his dress blues, a uniform he hadn't worn in years. Beside him sat Barnaby, wearing a new leather collar with a medal hanging from it. "The Medal of Valor," the governor announced, "is usually reserved for human officers. But today, we make an exception." He pinned the medal to Barnaby's collar. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. People cheered. But Barnaby didn't care about the applause. He didn't care about the medal. His eyes were fixed on the front row, where a little girl named Lily was sitting with her parents. She was smiling, holding a stuffed dog that looked just like him. When the ceremony ended, Lily ran up to the stage. Elias let the leash go slack. Barnaby met her halfway. He didn't jump. He simply lowered his head, allowing her to wrap her small arms around his neck. He closed his eyes and let out a soft sigh, his tail thumping a steady beat against the floorboards. Elias watched them, a lump forming in his throat. He had spent his life believing that war only took things away. It took friends, it took peace, it took pieces of your soul. But as he watched the old war dog gently nuzzle the child he had saved from the dark, Elias realized he was wrong. Sometimes, if you were lucky, and if you just listened to your instincts, the fight could give something back. Barnaby looked up at Elias, his amber eyes bright and clear. "Mission accomplished, partner," he seemed to say. "Let's go home, boy," Elias whispered. "Let's go home." Barnaby barked once, a happy, sharp sound, and trotted out into the sunlight, a hero who needed no words to tell his story.